Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, and today, live on June the 17th, I got another round of stories to get to today on today's show. We're going to start off with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, figuring out that Dak is going to be their priority to start the year. Then, as we get later on into the show, we're going to talk about the discussion around that I was thinking about with Trevor Lawrence and these quarterbacks now getting their extensions. Is it a better situation now for the market to dictate what these teams do, or is it still a valuable explanation to determine what a contract will be based on the player performance? Then, moving on, we're going to talk about a TikTok video that was discovered today on social media, and Brandon Ayuk seemingly putting an end to the contract talks between him and the San Francisco 49ers. So I'll get into those stories and much more on today's show. And as always, if you would, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and as well as remembering, if you have any questions or comments, please use the tip and donations link that you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By using this, I'm able to see your question or comment in that way, address anything you guys say, and get your guys' perspective and thoughts on anything on the show. It's a massive help for the show and the network, so please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. But like I mentioned before, jumping into the first segment, the Cowboys establishing Dak Prescott as a priority. This is a little bit out of the blue for me, just because of my standpoint on Dak, but I will get into that after I give a bit more context around this situation. You know, it's becoming a tight race so far in the quarterback market in free agency in this offseason between Green Bay, the Cowboys, and the Miami Dolphins to get a deal worked out for their quarterbacks because of the rising quarterback market. Tua, Dak, and Jordan Love have all made a great case to earn those top deals, and it is becoming a lot tighter, especially after that Trevor Lawrence contract extension a few days ago. Then you have this past weekend on ESPN with one of their NFL insiders, Jeremy Fowler, reporting that on SportsCenter, saying, "You've got Dak Prescott. The Cowboys have a world of problems here financially with 3 players they have to sign, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb as well. But the feeling around the league and sources I've talked to is that they want to start with Dak. They put it on the table with Dak's people that, hey, look, you're a priority. We want to try and get something done. As far as hard dollars, not a lot of progress yet. I would describe their efforts so far as passive, and that surprised me a little bit just because Dak is already coming off a contract extension, coming off of that 4-year, $160 million deal that he already previously got from the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cowboys already picked up the 5th-year option on Micah Parsons' deal as well as CeeDee Lamb. So they do have some time. They bought themselves some time there with Micah Parsons, but not so much CeeDee Lamb because he is now on that 5th year and he will be a free agent next offseason if no contract extension is finalized. So Dak now being the priority, I get it. It makes sense. You know, the quarterback, the most important position in the NFL. But is this the right standpoint to have if you're the Dallas Cowboys? I thought of a few points that, you know, raise some questions to support potentially the other side. If you aren't a supporter of Dak, if you don't think Dak should get this extension, I'm not saying he shouldn't, based on any other feelings except just on his performance. The biggest question with me is, you know, at some point, or at what point I should say, do you start wondering how far is Dak into his development? Have we reached the ceiling, especially in the playoffs where that has become the narrative around the Dallas Cowboys? How much better can he give out of his playoff performances that we are willing to give him 55, 54, maybe 57, $60 million per year on his next contract extension? You know, so far now with a lot of teams paying these quarterbacks, they want to get better, make more playoff appearances, and make more progress deeper in the playoffs. But the Dallas Cowboys are already there, and I'm not saying it's just all on their roster. It has nothing to do with Dak. Dak has certainly played a massive part in where they've gone and how successful they have been. But with that being said, it now just shifts. Now the expectations sort of shift a little bit more. The field goal sort of moves a little bit. The posts keep moving. The media keeps moving. The standard so far set for the Dallas Cowboys. And with them constantly being in the playoffs, winning the division, I think moving the expectations is fair on that point because you have to at least get better as you keep going. And with Dak being 2-5 in the playoffs so far, and this roster already being very good as it is, you have to wonder, at what point, at least for me as a fan, if I'm watching, how much more can this quarterback give us if we're going to just continue to make the playoffs and have the same results as we have had in previous years? And I know if you've watched this show, I've been a big advocate of Mike Tomlin. Not as much playoff success as other coaches, similar to Dak Prescott, not too successful in the playoffs, but I'm always advocating to keep him there, keep the consistency going, and it's always a great thing for a coach because you can't always find that in somebody else if you decide to move on from Mike Tomlin. But in the same breath, I might be contradicting myself in that aspect, but the Steelers, me as a Steelers fan, we're not paying Mike Tomlin $60 million, $55 million, the highest paid contract in the NFL to stay with the Steelers. That's the biggest difference. You're allocating a lot of money to Dak, who is only 30 years old. I'm not saying he is definitely not going to get better, but at some point as well, you have to just think about it. Maybe we've reached the limit here with Dak, at least with Dak and the Cowboys. Maybe he goes on somewhere else and does great. Maybe the chemistry, the cooperation with the Dallas Cowboys just has reached its limit. He could go out and try his luck somewhere else, and that could work. But for right now, I think the Cowboys find themselves in a weird spot because if you look at the other two options, like Jeremy Fowler mentioned, CeeDee and Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons, it's nice that you can get it pushed back a little bit more because he is not a free agent until 2026. But with CeeDee Lamb, he is younger. He has produced at a great level, arguably to match Justin Jefferson for the highest paid wide receiver. But the Dallas Cowboys can't afford to have one of the highest paid quarterbacks, highest paid receiver, the highest paid outside linebacker or edge rusher once Micah Parsons is due for his extension. And what's funny about this, I think many people won't mention it, that if Dak wasn't a quarterback, I think up to this point, if you have these two other positions that you do need extensions, I don't think he would be the first priority. And I don't think that's too crazy to say for Dak. Just because he's a quarterback, he wouldn't be the first priority, at least in my mind, because the quarterbacks just shoot up to the top of the list because you need that, as we've seen in recent years, in recent games. Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff now with the Lions, Brock Purdy with the 49ers. You need that quarterback for as talented as your team is. The 49ers are a great example. Great roster, all-star roster, but once Brock Purdy went down in that game, there was no chance at all anymore for them to contend in that game. Everybody turned the TV off because they knew there was no chance that the 49ers could compete with the Eagles. So from that standpoint, I think, again, you have to just monitor it and try to keep it as fair as possible based on the production. That's a big, point for me, a big decision maker for me when I'm looking at these contracts, who deserves what, who deserves to get paid over another guy at his same position. If Dak wasn't a quarterback, would he be the priority right now instead of CeeDee and Micah Parsons? I think it makes a good case that he wouldn't be, but just because that position is so held to a high standard, it really just shoots him up that list. And also, Dak is the priority right now, as the Cowboys have said, but to me, that does come with a little bit of context and a little bit of a stipulation because he could be the priority right now, and it's interesting to mention him as a priority because they are competing in a sense with the Packers, I'm forgetting their names now, the Dolphins, as well as some of those teams to sign their quarterbacks. And say Tua or Jordan Love get that contract extension before Dak Prescott and they reset the market, or they get close to 55 million, 54, 55, or maybe over that, and they reset the market. I think at that point, the Cowboys have to reevaluate their statement that Dak is a priority, because he could be the priority right now once you still have it in that range of $55 million. I think they could cough up that and then still sign Micah or CeeDee. I don't think both, but if that becomes the case, I think you could sign at least one of them and keep Dak. But if the Dolphins or the Packers beat the Cowboys to signing their quarterbacks first and they get a ton of money, maybe reset the market, then I think the Cowboys have to backtrack a little bit and say, all right, we want to keep our quarterback, but we can't physically, logistically pay as much as Dak might want now that Tua or Jordan Love have gone over 55, over $57 million. We just can't pay that for a quarterback and still expect to sign at least one of the other guys in their positions. That's just not fair in my estimation to those other guys who I think have still a lot more room to grow and a lot more impact to be made than Dak, at least with the Dallas Cowboys. And also, just as the last point to sort of play devil's advocate here to my point that I'm making, you could say that there are other wide receiver options out there, or there are more wide receiver options out there. If you were to move on from CeeDee Lamb, you definitely have more receiving options out there than you would have quarterbacks, because it's easy to say, from my standpoint, that Dak has sort of reached the limit with the Cowboys, but at the same time, if you do move on from him, who do you have there waiting to try and sign, to try and lure in free agency to come be your starting quarterback? Is Trey Lance that guy? Do you have that much confidence in him? I wouldn't, because you haven't seen any film of him so far in the NFL, really. So there is that option to sort of flip it on its head if you want to keep Dak and maybe you have more receiving options to potentially move on from CeeDee Lamb, but I don't see that happening. I think they keep CeeDee Lamb. I think they keep Micah Parsons, and at the same time, it's just interesting to talk about with Dak being the priority now. It does come with a little bit of context and a little bit of stipulation there, because it is very much give or take right now with these teams, monitoring how the Packers do it, how the Miami Dolphins do it. I expect one of these deals to get done before training camp here in the next 4 to 5 weeks. So who that is will have a big determining factor on the rest of these quarterbacks. But for right now, we'll leave this discussion here, and we're going to move on with the rest of the show. We're going to get into more of a deeper discussion around the quarterbacks in the next segment, talking about this whole idea of the contracts being handed out based on production or just based on what every other team does, and not trying to be left to be last in extending your quarterback. I think there's a lot more to dig into there, and we will dig more into that after this break. You are watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.